He's lazy. He's a user. He has no ambition. These are the words that have defined Sumit Singh in the court of public opinion for years. We've seen the clips, heard the family's pleas, and watched Jenny's growing desperation as her life savings dwindle. We've all asked the same question: why won't Sumit just get a job? But look closer. Look past the narrative we've been fed. Watch this moment. Slow down. The heavy breath. The exhaustion in his eyes. This isn't the look of a man who is lazy. This is the look of a man who is hiding a profound struggle. This isn't about a lack of motivation. This is a symptom. And it's a symptom of a secret he's terrified to admit, even to Jenny, a secret that recontextualizes every fight, every excuse, and every tear they've ever shed. Before we dive deep into the evidence we've uncovered, if you believe in looking past the surface and finding the human stories behind the reality TV drama, take a second to hit that like button. And if you're new here, subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss our compassionate deep dives that challenge everything you think you know about the 90-day cast. To understand the depth of the secret, we first have to understand the lie. Not the lies Sumit has told, but the lie we have all collectively told ourselves about him. We must first build the case against Sumit using the very evidence that has made him a controversial figure, to truly appreciate how every single piece of that evidence can be turned on its head. The narrative of the lazy husband wasn't born in a vacuum. It was carefully constructed, piece by piece, over multiple seasons and countless hours of television. It began as a whisper, a nagging doubt in the back of viewers' minds, and it crescendoed into a deafening roar of judgment. Let's rewind. Our journey with Sumit and Jenny began with a deception of a different kind: the catfishing. Michael Jones, the handsome young British man, was the avatar for a man in India who felt trapped. While the focus at the time was on the betrayal of identity, perhaps we missed the first clue. Why invent a persona so completely removed from his own reality? The common explanation is a lack of confidence, a fear that his true self wouldn't be enough for an American woman. But what if it was more than just insecurity about his looks or his background? What if it was an early subconscious attempt to escape a body, a physical reality that he already felt was failing him? A fantasy not just of being someone else, but of being someone able-bodied, someone without limitations, someone who could live up to the masculine ideal of a protector and provider that his culture so strictly demands. This was our first introduction to Sumit's pattern of avoidance, a pattern that would come to define his entire story. When the truth was revealed, and Jenny, against all odds, chose to fly to India, the narrative shifted. The question was no longer, who is Sumit, but what will Sumit do? This is where the foundation of the lazy husband theory was poured. Jenny arrived, leaving her life, her family, and her financial security behind, all on the promise of marriage. Sumit, in turn, was expected to stand up to his parents, secure their future, and formalize their union. He did none of these things with any sense of urgency. Instead, we were treated to a masterclass in procrastination. The conversations about marriage were deflected. The confrontations with his parents were delayed. The issue of his existing secret marriage hung in the air, an insurmountable obstacle that he seemed almost paralyzed by. We, the audience, interpreted this paralysis as cowardice. We saw a man who couldn't or wouldn't fight for the woman he claimed to love. We labeled him weak, indecisive, a mama's boy, who lacked the spine to forge his own path. Then came the financial strain, the true bedrock of the lazy accusation. Jenny's savings account became a recurring character in their story, its dwindling balance a constant source of anxiety. We saw Jenny, a woman in her 60s, express a desire to work, to contribute, only to be stymied by visa restrictions. The onus, therefore, fell squarely on Sumit. He was a young, able-bodied man in his own country. It was his duty, in the eyes of his family, his culture, and the global audience, to be the provider. Yet every time the topic of employment arose, it was met with a new excuse. The divorce was costly. The pandemic made things difficult. He was focused on getting his parents' approval. He wanted to be a chef, but the timing wasn't right. The reasons were plentiful, but the results were always the same: inaction. Clip after clip reinforced this perception. We saw Jenny carefully counting rupees, her face etched with worry, while Sumit offered vague reassurances. "Don't worry, Jenny. Everything will be okay. I will handle it." But these were just words, placations designed to postpone the inevitable, difficult conversation. His parents, Anil and Sana, became the voice of the audience's frustration. Their objections to the age gap were often framed in practical financial terms. How will you survive? Who will take care of you? Sumit has no stable job. They called him lazy to his face. They accused Jenny of ruining his ambition. And in those moments, Sumit rarely fought back with a concrete plan. He didn't present a business proposal or a resume. He simply absorbed the criticism, his shoulders slumping, his face a mask of weary resignation. We saw this as an admission of guilt. We believed his parents were right about his lack of drive because his own actions, or lack thereof, seemed to confirm their worst fears. His general demeanor did little to help his case. In a franchise filled with hustlers, entrepreneurs, and people working multiple jobs to make ends meet, Sumit seemed content with a life of domesticity. He enjoyed cooking, he liked spending quiet time at home with Jenny. His ambitions, if any, seemed small, personal, and certainly not lucrative. He spoke of a desire for a simple life, a peaceful life. To an audience steeped in the culture of the hustle and the grind, this sounded like a beautifully packaged excuse for doing nothing. Peace and simplicity don't pay the bills. They don't secure a future. And so the narrative was complete. Sumit Singh was the quintessential lazy husband, a man who coasted on his older partner's life savings, using cultural obstacles and family drama as a smokescreen to hide his fundamental lack of ambition. This is the Sumit we all think we know. This is the version of the story that is easy, comfortable, and fits neatly into a reality TV archetype. And this is the version of the story that we believe is profoundly, tragically wrong. Now, let us begin the real investigation. Let us discard our preconceived notions and re-examine the evidence, not as television viewers, but as forensic analysts of human behavior. The first exhibit in our case is the most visible, yet the most easily dismissed: Sumit's physical appearance. We've been watching this man for years, but have we truly been seeing him? Our brains are trained to notice dramatic transformations, but the clues to a chronic, ongoing health battle are often subtle, a slow erosion of vitality that happens right before our eyes. Let's analyze recent footage, particularly from their time on Happily Ever After. Compare these images to clips from the early seasons of The Other Way. The change is undeniable, but it's not straightforward. It's the hallmark of a body in flux, a body at war with itself. Notice the weight fluctuations. It's not a simple case of gaining or losing weight. There are periods where he appears puffier, his face fuller, a sign that could be consistent with fluid retention or inflammation, a common symptom of autoimmune disorders or a side effect of steroid treatments used to manage them. Then, in other scenes, he appears drawn, his face thinner, with a weariness that seems to have settled deep into his features. This oscillation isn't typically the sign of a lifestyle choice, it's the sign of a system out of balance. Look closer at his eyes. The dark circles, the periorbital hyperpigmentation, have become a near-permanent feature. We dismiss this as a sign of fatigue, and we are not wrong. But what is the source of that fatigue? Is it the simple tiredness that comes from a poor night's sleep? Or is it something deeper, more systemic? This is the profound, bone-deep exhaustion that people with chronic illnesses describe, an exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch. It's a fatigue that is a constant companion, a heavy cloak that dulls the senses and drains the will. These are not the signs of a happy, relaxed newlywed settling into a simple life. These are red flags, subtle signals from a body under duress. Now, let's consider his physicality, his very presence in a room. Watch how he moves, especially in moments of low-key stress or during long conversations. There's a certain lethargy, a deliberation to his movements that can be misinterpreted as laziness. Notice the moments he leans against a counter for support, or the way he sinks into a sofa, not with the relaxation of a man at rest, but with the gravitational pull of someone whose energy reserves are critically low. Pay attention to his breathing. In moments of even minor confrontation, his breathing can become more shallow, more noticeable. We've seen him look visibly out of breath after a heated discussion. Is this simply the result of being out of shape? Or is it something more concerning? Could it be a sign of a compromised cardiovascular or respiratory system, where any exertion, emotional or physical, puts a significant strain on the body? We have been conditioned to see a lazy man. We propose that you are looking at a man who is meticulously and perhaps unconsciously conserving every ounce of his limited energy just to get through the day. Let's move to our second area of investigation: his profound and consistent avoidance of stress. This has long been considered Sumit's greatest character flaw. His inability to stand up to his parents, his tendency to placate Jenny rather than solve problems, his desire to let conflicts just fade away. We've labeled this as emotional weakness, immaturity, a lack of a backbone. But what if we reframe this entire pattern of behavior not as a psychological failing, but as a medical necessity? What if Sumit has been medically advised or has learned through painful experience to avoid stressful situations at all costs? For millions of people living with chronic conditions, from autoimmune diseases like lupus or Crohn's, to chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, or even certain heart conditions, stress is not just an emotional inconvenience. It is a physiological trigger. A surge of stress hormones like cortisol can set off a cascade of debilitating symptoms: excruciating pain, crippling fatigue, brain fog, digestive issues, a full-blown flare-up that can leave them bedridden for days. Now, rewatch every single fight he has ever had with his parents. These are not just unpleasant family arguments, they are potential health triggers of the highest order. Watch Sumit's body language as his mother, Sana, begins to raise her voice. He doesn't just look uncomfortable, he looks panicked. He physically retreats, he shuts down. His immediate goal is not to win the argument, but to end the situation. His constant refrain, "Please stop. Let's not talk about this now," isn't just deflection. It could be a desperate plea to stop a chain reaction he knows is about to begin in his own body. When he ultimately capitulates, when he tells his mother what she wants to hear, we see it as him being a spineless mama's boy. But what if it's an act of self-preservation? What if he understands that winning the fight against his mother could cost him the next 3 days of his life, leaving him unable to get out of bed? He's not choosing his mother over Jenny. He may be choosing a baseline level of physical functionality over a debilitating flare-up. This theory also illuminates his dynamic with Jenny. Jenny, understandably, is a woman who wants answers, who needs solutions. She pushes for conversations about money, about their future, about his family. And Sumit's response is almost always to delay, to distract, to promise he'll handle it later. This is infuriating for her, and for us as viewers. It looks like he's disrespecting her concerns. But if he is operating with a severely limited energy budget, a concept often explained through spoon theory, his behavior makes a different kind of sense. A high-stakes conversation about their finances might use up all of his spoons for the day, leaving him with no energy for anything else. He isn't avoiding the problem because he doesn't care. He's avoiding it because he instinctively knows he doesn't have the physiological resources to handle it at that moment. His desire for a peaceful life is not an excuse for laziness. It is a requirement for his survival. He is trying to create a low-stress environment not for his comfort, but for his health. The tragedy is that his very method of creating that peace, avoidance, is the primary source of conflict and stress in his marriage. Finally, we come to the third pillar of our case, the catalog of vague explanations. For years, Sumit has offered a steady stream of what we have always dismissed as flimsy excuses. The times he has vaguely said he was not feeling well or just tired are too numerous to count. In the context of a difficult conversation or a task he needs to perform, these statements sound like blatant evasions. We hear, "I'm tired," and we translate it to, "I don't want to do this." We hear, "I don't feel good," and we interpret it as, "I'm looking for a way out of this responsibility." We have dismissed every single one of these utterances as a lie, an excuse from a man who is allergic to responsibility. But what if they were the literal truth? What if, in those moments, he was offering a tiny, heavily veiled glimpse into his reality? A cry for help, disguised as an excuse? Let's consider the immense cultural pressure at play here. In many traditional cultures, including in India, the identity of a man is inextricably linked to his strength, his virility, and his ability to provide for and protect his family. This concept of masculinity is rigid and demanding. To admit to a chronic, invisible illness, an ailment that has no visible wound, no clear endpoint, one that simply limits your energy and your capacity, would be a source of profound, almost unthinkable shame. It would be seen as a fundamental failure of his manhood. How could he possibly explain to his parents, who already see him as a disappointment, that he is not just unwilling but potentially unable to hold down a demanding full-time job? How could he admit to Jenny, the woman who gave up everything to be with him, that he might not be the strong, capable provider she needs and deserves? He can't. The cultural and personal shame would be too great. So instead of saying, "Dekikyo, Jenny, I'm experiencing a severe wave of fatigue and brain fog, and my joints are aching, so I can't possibly go to that job interview today," he says, "I'm just tired." Instead of explaining, "The stress of this argument with my mother might trigger a flare-up that will make me sick for a week," he says, I'm just not feeling well. We, the audience, along with his family, have taken these statements at their most superficial value. We have never considered the possibility that they are understated, culturally coded confessions from a man who lacks the language or the courage to name his invisible enemy. He is trapped. If he tells the truth, he risks being seen as less of a man, a burden, a failure. If he stays silent, he is judged as lazy, unmotivated, and uncaring. He has chosen the latter, presumably believing it is the less damaging of two terrible options. He has chosen to accept the world's scorn for his perceived lack of character rather than admit to what he sees as a flaw in his physical being. Every vague excuse we have ever rolled our eyes at might have been a desperate, fragmented attempt to communicate an unbearable truth. He wasn't making an excuse. He was telling us, in the only way he knew how, that he was struggling. And we weren't listening. We were too busy judging. This pattern of behavior, this trinity of clues, the fluctuating physical signs, the desperate avoidance of stress, and the constant stream of vague, understated ailments, points us in a chilling and definitive direction. We are no longer looking at a simple case of a man who doesn't want to work. We are looking at the carefully constructed facade of a man who is likely managing a significant, life-altering, and secret health condition. We have spent years analyzing the drama of Sumit and Jenny's relationship through the lens of romance, culture, and family. It's time to view it through the lens of pathology. The evidence is not just circumstantial. It is overwhelming when viewed as a cohesive whole. The physical toll is visible on his face and in his posture. The psychological coping mechanisms are evident in his every interaction. The verbal clues are littered throughout every season of their journey. We have been watching a man suffer in plain sight, and because his suffering didn't fit the narrative we expected, we have either ignored it or misinterpreted it as a flaw of character. The question is no longer if Sumit is hiding something. The question is, what is he hiding? And how devastating will the truth be when it finally comes to light? We've laid out the symptoms, we've analyzed the behavior, we've established the pattern. Now, we must put the pieces together and give a name to the invisible enemy that has been dictating Sumit's life and slowly poisoning his marriage from the inside out. So what is the ghost that haunts Sumit Singh? What is the invisible enemy that has shaped his every decision, his every inaction, his every weary sigh? We are not physicians, and this is not a diagnosis. But by assembling the constellation of symptoms, behaviors, and unspoken truths, a devastating picture emerges. We are likely looking at a chronic, systemic condition, one that wages a quiet war against the body day in and day out. Let's consider the possibilities, the devastating theories that transform this simple story of a lazy husband into a profound human tragedy. Could it be a heart condition, perhaps a congenital issue that has worsened with age, or a condition developed in early adulthood? This would immediately explain the lethargy, the shortness of breath we've witnessed in moments of stress. It would explain why a doctor would sternly advise a patient to avoid high-pressure environments, like a demanding new career and intense emotional confrontations, like the very ones he constantly faces with his family. A heart condition is a constant, terrifying companion. Every argument, every stressful demand would feel like a gamble, a roll of the dice with his own mortality. He wouldn't be avoiding work out of laziness. He would be avoiding a potential cardiac event. He wouldn't be placating his parents out of weakness. He would be trying to keep his own heart beating steadily in his chest. Or perhaps we are looking at an autoimmune disease, a condition like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, or Crohn's disease, where the body's own immune system, designed to protect, turns on itself and attacks healthy tissue. These conditions are notoriously difficult to diagnose and are characterized by unpredictable cycles of flare-ups and remission. This would perfectly explain the physical fluctuations we've observed, the periods of puffiness and inflammation followed by periods of weight loss and exhaustion. It would explain the need for a low-stress life, as stress is a primary trigger for agonizing flare-ups that can cause debilitating joint pain, digestive distress, skin issues, and a level of fatigue that is beyond comprehension for a healthy person. In this scenario, Sumit's life is a constant, exhausting calculation. Will this action, this conversation, this stressor cost me a week of my life in bed, racked with pain? A man living in that reality would not be seeking a high-powered career. He would be seeking sanctuary. He would be seeking peace, not as a luxury, but as a form of medicine. But there is another possibility, one that is perhaps the most insidious of all because it is so often dismissed, so deeply misunderstood, even by the medical community. We could be looking at a post-viral fatigue syndrome, something like myalgic encephalomyelitis, more commonly and cruelly known as chronic fatigue syndrome. This is a condition that often begins after a seemingly innocuous viral infection and leaves a person with a profound systemic exhaustion that is not relieved by sleep. Its hallmark symptom is called post-exertional malaise, a clinical term for a devastating reality. Any physical, mental, or emotional overexertion results in a crash, a complete collapse of the body's energy systems that can last for days, weeks, or even longer. Imagine your body's energy is a phone battery that never charges beyond 20%. Now imagine that any significant activity, a stressful conversation, a few hours of focused work, an emotional argument doesn't just drain that 20%, but breaks the battery itself, leaving you at 1% and unable to recharge for days on end. That is the reality for people living with this condition. This theory explains everything, absolutely everything. It explains why a seemingly healthy young man has no energy. It explains why he cannot commit to the rigors of a 9-to-5 job, where a single bad day could lead to a week of being unable to function. It explains why he so desperately avoids conflict with his parents, because the emotional energy required for those battles would literally leave him physically bankrupt. It explains his desire for a simple, quiet, peaceful life with Jenny, because in that simplicity lies the only chance he has at managing his condition and maintaining a baseline of functionality. He's not lazy, he is a man operating with a perpetually broken energy system, a man meticulously and desperately trying to prevent the next crash. And this leads us to the most painful question of all. Why the secrecy? Why endure the world's scorn, his family's shame, and his wife's anxiety? Why not simply tell the truth? The answer is as simple as it is heartbreaking. Shame. A deep, culturally ingrained shame that is perhaps more powerful than the illness itself. Sumit comes from a culture where a man's worth is measured by his ability to provide, to be the strong head of the household. To admit to a chronic, invisible illness that renders him unable to fulfill this sacred duty would be, in his eyes and the eyes of his community, to admit that he is a failure as a man. It is a confession of weakness, of inadequacy. He fears that telling the truth would not bring him sympathy, but contempt. He fears his parents would see it as yet another excuse, another failing. And most devastatingly, he is hiding it from Jenny. He's hiding it to protect her, but also to protect himself from what he fears her reaction would be. He saw how his family treated Jenny, accusing her of being a drain on him, a burden. His greatest terror, the theory suggests, is that he is the true burden. He is the one who cannot provide. He is the one who cannot secure their future. He is hiding his illness from Jenny because he is terrified that if she knew the full extent of his limitations, she would see him not as a husband, but as a patient, as another person she has to take care of. He would become the very thing his family accused her of being. And so he remains silent, choosing to be seen as lazy rather than incapacitated, choosing to be seen as unmotivated rather than unwell. He is shouldering the weight of the world's judgment to spare himself the shame of his own perceived weakness, to protect his wife from a truth he fears would break her heart and her faith in him. This is the tragic, soul-crushing irony at the heart of their story. Every single conflict that plagues their marriage stems from this one devastating secret. His family shames him for not being a man, for not working, for not living up to their expectations, all while he may be silently battling a disease that has robbed him of the very strength they demand. Jenny worries about their finances, she pushes him to find work, she frets about their future, all because she is operating under the assumption that her husband is able-bodied and simply choosing not to act. She sees his avoidance as a lack of love or commitment, when it may be a desperate act of self-preservation. He, in turn, suffers in a silence so profound, so isolating, it's a prison of his own making. He endures the criticism from his parents and the disappointment from his wife, absorbing it all, because the alternative, confessing his truth, feels like an even greater betrayal of his role as a husband and a man. The one secret he is keeping to protect his marriage, to protect his image in Jenny's eyes, is the very thing that is eroding its foundation. It is a cancer in their relationship, creating misunderstanding, resentment, and fear where there should be compassion and support. We are left with a heartbreaking tableau: a man suffering alone, a wife worrying for the wrong reasons, and a family passing judgment on a battle they cannot even begin to comprehend. The tension in their lives is not about a job or money or parental approval. It is about a secret that is growing more powerful with each passing day. The truth, when it finally comes out, as it inevitably must, will be a moment of reckoning. It could be the key that unlocks a new level of intimacy and understanding between them, a chance for Jenny to finally see the warrior her husband has been all along, fighting a battle she never knew existed. Or the years of deception, however well intentioned, may have caused too much damage, creating a chasm of mistrust that even the most tragic truth cannot bridge. The real story of Sumit and Jenny isn't a love story complicated by family drama. It's the story of a man whose body may have betrayed him, and whose fear of the truth may end up costing him everything he has fought so hard to keep. Does this theory change how you see Sumit? Does it reframe his actions from laziness to a quiet, desperate struggle? We believe in looking for the humanity behind the reality TV edit. Send your support for Sumit in the comments if you think he might be struggling with more than we've been shown. And if you want to continue challenging the narratives we're given, subscribe to this channel for more compassionate deep dives into the 90-day cast. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.